Back in the early days of gaming, if you asked anyone who they considered to be the mascot of Nintendo, who do you think you'd hear? Mario? Well, during the era of Nintendo's arcade reign, you'd likely hear his arch nemesis of the famous Donkey Kong game, the titular Donkey Kong himself. So hopefully, I'm not in the minority when I say that's crazy. After 3 successful arcade titles, Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and Donkey Kong 3, and one admittedly less than successful edutainment game, that Nintendo would let their golden goose sit and gather dust for 11 years, until Rare decided to revive the franchise with the incredibly successful Donkey Kong Country series for the Super Nintendo. Did Nintendo really not bother with the character that made them famous for that long? Well, that's what I thought until a few months ago. When making the Yeah Yeah Beavis video, I noticed this. A potentially lost piece of Donkey Kong's history. Well, first things first, we have to find out what Return of Donkey Kong is. Based on the fact that it was in a July 1989 issue that only had NES games for sale, it's safe to assume that it was an NES game that was planned to be released at some point around that time. These secondhand game selling inserts are infamous for not being representative of what was currently available, such as the popular Yeah Yeah Beavis. So odds are it had already been known about for a while, and the presence of it here shouldn't be taken as evidence that it was, at some point, released. Stumped as to where to go from here, I just googled Return of Donkey Kong NES and found an article on the Super Mario Wiki that had these scans. This one, from the official Nintendo Player's Guide from 1987, reads, "This is your chance to get hold of that barrel-throwing, mischief-making rascal Donkey Kong, and take control. Nintendo's best-known character is back, and he's up to more tricks and trouble than you can imagine." The second mention comes from an issue of the Nintendo Fun Club, dated February 1988, and is much more interesting than the previous one. This one says, "That barrel-throwing rascal Donkey Kong is some kind of crazy. In Donkey Kong, he has Pauline in his clutches. In Donkey Kong Jr., he gets locked in a cage. In Donkey Kong Jr. Math, he knows the score in a math jungle. In Donkey Kong 3, he makes trouble for Stanley the Bugman. And now, Donkey Kong is soon to come back with more barrel-tossing fun. But this time, you're in control. Are you video buff enough to handle the one and only Return of Donkey Kong? Watch for it." So what can we gather from this? Well, for one, based on the description, you seem to actually play as Donkey Kong here, with throwing barrels being a focus of both of these blurbs. Other than that, we don't really have much to work with. At first, I thought this was an entirely cancelled reboot of the DK franchise. However, after looking at all the evidence, there is one somewhat likely candidate as to what Return of Donkey Kong became. I'm talking about the NES re-release of Donkey Kong and DK Jr., Donkey Kong Classics. After thinking about it for a few seconds, I thought that there was no way Return of Donkey Kong became Arcade Classics, but after looking at all the evidence, I can't rule out the possibility. Alright, first, the name, Return of Donkey Kong. Would that fit the description of DK Classics? 100% yes, it is in its most literal sense, a return of Donkey Kong, revisiting the classic gameplay that players fell in love with years prior. Next up, is there barrel-tossing fun? Also yes, it's a re-release of the OG Donkey Kong after all, so of course barrels are going to be an obstacle of the game. Lastly, and the one I had the most trouble explaining, was the entire "you're in control" bit. While you don't play as Donkey Kong in either of the included titles, you do play as his kid, Donkey Kong Jr., so maybe they were referring to him? This one I was cut up on for a bit, but thinking about the vague wording, it makes so much sense. They wouldn't want their customers to think, oh, well it's just the first 2 Donkey Kong games again, and pass on buying it. So they used vague, exciting wording to convince readers to inevitably check it out. I think that the most damning piece of evidence is that the fact that right next to the title, Return of Donkey Kong, is a picture of Donkey Kong, obviously taken from the final stage of the original. There is one pretty big issue, however. The second blurb specifically named each of the original Donkey Kong games. So the only thing that really strikes me as potentially bringing this entire theory down is that they named all 4 of the originals, but only included the first 2. Not to mention, I think that they're named and described to draw a juxtaposition between how in the predecessors Donkey Kong was a nemesis, whereas here he's playable. And even then my explanation for the entire "you're in control" bit is quite the stretch. When I first started this video, I had thought that I had stumbled across a failed revival of the arcade icon. Then I thought it was simply renamed to Donkey Kong Classics. And now? Honestly, I'm unsure. There's enough evidence supporting either conclusion, so I'm not going to say one way or another. I think that there's still credence to the idea of a reboot of sorts, especially given how, despite the vague wording, they always specifically named playable DK as a selling point. But there's also enough information to lead to the conclusion that it was just renamed DK Classics. The thing that confuses me the most is that Classics came out in 1988, the same year that Return of Donkey Kong was being put into Nintendo publications. However, as far as my research has been able to discern, which while not 100% conclusive, I haven't found any reference to Classics in official Nintendo publications. I may have missed something, but seeing as it was absent from the September-October 1988 issue of Nintendo Power, the same month the game was released, I have doubts it could be found elsewhere. On the whole, the Return of Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Classics, if they're not the same game, are both incredibly strange to me. One was mentioned a grand total of twice and never came out, while the other has no mentions and was released anyway. Donkey Kong Classics seems to have sold well enough, going for around 15 to 20 bucks on eBay. It's not scarce at all. Now the real question is, what do you believe? Do you think that Return of Donkey Kong is an entirely scrapped revival of the icon? Or was it just an earlier name for what became Donkey Kong Classics? Let me know in the comments down below. If you liked this video, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel a bunch, and if you're interested in mysteries such as the Return of Donkey Kong, you'll probably like my video on Yeah Yeah Beavis. Sources, as always, are in the description below, and I'll see you guys next video.